Hello! When discussing access control systems for enterprise equipment, we are not only referring to individual devices such as a controller, reader, or lock. We are referring to an entire space, entry points, or a combination of them, all equipped in a specialized manner based on their location and the task they address. Alright, typically on the perimeter you'll find entrances, a car checkpoint, and guest service areas for the company, which include turnstiles or, for example, barriers. In most cases, doors are used as internal points. In this series of videos, we'll discuss the organization of such zones without going into device communication details, but taking a detailed look at the possible list of equipment characteristic for a particular access point, as well as the tasks that Sigur solves with its help. And specifically, this video tutorial is dedicated, as we think, to the most popular of all possible types of breakpoints, doors. For convenience, let's divide the video into logical blocks based on the tasks solved by the door as an access point. So first and foremost, doors are a device that obstructs unrestricted passage for accessing objects, employees, and guests of the company. The security of the facility depends on how well security systems flexibly control the doors, particularly the locking devices. Secondly, just like at any other entry point, every entry through the door should be personalized. First and foremost, this is important for further analysis of accumulated data. So, for example, with impersonal passages, it is impossible to keep track of working hours, and that's one of the most popular functions of system. Thirdly, let's talk about organizing the evacuation of personnel in case of emergencies, about ways to unlock doors and navigation that facilitates the process of employees leaving the premises. Returning to the fact that security systems is part of the company's unified infrastructure, let's address remote monitoring of door conditions. The speed at which a responsible employee receives information about something going wrong has an impact on everything I mentioned earlier, including the security level and accuracy of the collected data. Before moving on to the first block, I'll note that any of the Sigur controllers have everything you need to control the doors, as well as all the related equipment. You don't need any extra extension modules or similar devices for this. All additional devices, whether it's various buttons or sensors, usually get hooked up to the discrete inputs of the controller. Alright, for the E510 model, it's 4 doors with one-way access control, or 2 doors in case of connecting readers both at the entrance and at the exit. For E2 and E4 controller models that support OSDP reader connection, when using this interface, up to 2 and 4 doors can be controlled for access control in both directions, respectively. So let's talk about a door as a barrier device, focusing on the necessary equipment for implementing this function, locks and door closers. However, before we start, I would like to note that besides the most common single-leaf doors, you can also connect figure controllers to less common types of doors. Automatic sliding, double leaf, swing, and pivot doors. The system can consider all the nuances of work for each of them. For instance, the swinging door lock will only engage when it's completely still. All the settings responsible for the logic of controlling any executive device, in our case the door, are located in the access point settings on the equipment tab. For instance, the setting to lock the swinging door only in idle state is in access point settings of door type under locking delay parameter. Now let's go back to discussing locks. They can be electromagnetic, electromechanical, shift, solenoid, and electric motor types of structures. In addition, the security systems market is also widely represented by various locks. Each of the listed types can be divided into 2 groups based on control type. Potential, when the lock requires a long-term power supply for unlocking or locking, and its pulse, when the lock needs a short-term voltage supply to open or close. The selection of the potential control or pulse control logic is also found in the access point settings within the control parameter. You can connect different types of locks with different control logics to one Sigur controller at the same time, which allows you to build complex access control logics based on a single device. I want to point out separately the wireless locks. They don't require connection to a controller. Usually they already have a built-in reader, so they are standalone access points. These locks have the capability to be installed on any doors, but they are most frequently installed in hotels as well as in spaces that have high requirements for interior design or in places where it is difficult or impossible to lay cables. In Sigur, we have integrated lock systems from manufacturers like Dermacab, Assa Abloy, Simons Voss, and Salter. Now let's talk about identifying and recording door passages. In this block, we'll cover various types of readers and accordingly methods of identification, exit request buttons, as well as touch on the topic of integration with security systems for intercoms. I'll say it again, if you need analytics in the future, for example, tracking employee working hours, you need to make sure that all entries are correctly recorded in the system. The first condition for this is to install readers in both directions of movement through the access point, at the entrance and at the exit. Besides that, this approach will also ensure the functioning of the zone control function, which can come in handy in case of emergencies when employee location information is critical. To reduce the overall cost of the system, instead of installing a second reader, a button is often used, pressing which, although it leads to unlocking the door, but makes the passage impersonal. Accordingly, it's suitable for cases where neither analysis nor special strictness of access is required. When it comes to card readers, the controllers in Sigur support the connection of any models of such devices that have standard VGANT or OSDP output interfaces. The choice of a suitable communication interface depends on the object and controller model. For example, you can connect any VGANT interface reader to the E510 and to the E2 and E4 controller models. In addition to VGANT, you can also connect readers via the OSDP interface. Just a reminder, OSDP is an open interface. This allowed us to develop our own proprietary setup, SSDP, expanding the possibilities of interaction between the controller and the reader in terms of basic reading and indication settings, as well as updating device firmware directly from the Sigur software interface. Overall, the freedom to choose a reader allows for using the identification method within the system that is most convenient for the company's staff or guests. I'll list some recommendations for installing readers. For instance, readers must be positioned so that the same identifier doesn't fall within the range of multiple devices simultaneously. It is not recommended to install the reader on metal surfaces, near sources of radio interference and power cables. This reduces the reading range of identifiers, including the reading range of mobile phones. It is undesirable to install readers in areas exposed to prolonged direct sunlight. This can lead to device overheating. Special attention should be paid to the door opening sensor. In its absence, passage logging is also impossible, as successful employee identification does not always indicate their actual passage. Last item here is information about intercoms in this section. At the time of recording this video, Sigur has integration with a number of intercom panels, such as base IP. Now let's consider what equipment makes the door a full-fledged component of a comprehensive security system. In particular, let's discuss devices for emergency door unlocking and audio-visual indicators to organize the evacuation of personnel in case of emergencies. In case of emergencies at the facility, various emergency unlocking devices are highly sought after. They can be either manual or automatic. Unfortunately, the former do not have an established name. They can be found under the names door unlock button, manual security fire alarm, and door unlocking device. Normally, they are a well-known green plastic housing with a push-button device that locks in the pressed state, and this can be released by using a special key designed for this purpose. When pressed, the button opens the electrical circuit, sending a command to the controller for emergency door unlocking. These buttons are connected to special terminals on the controller responsible for emergency unlocking points of entry. To activate the emergency door unlocking inputs of the controller, you need to go to the Equipment tab in the Access Point settings and then switch to the General tab. Eliminate the checkbox, display only basic settings, and enable the function Use Fire Alarm Sensor to activate the feature that allows for utilizing the fire alarm sensor for enhanced functionality. Here, optionally, you can specify which access points will not be unlocked during an alarm. In a similar way, you can connect the controller and fire alarm panel to automatically unlock doors in case of a fire alarm. Additionally, an additional indication device can be installed near the door to visually inform the user about any situation. For instance, the door is currently in a locked state, therefore it is futile to swipe the card for entry, or about the detection of door holding. In particular, such a device can be an information display of an emergency exit. Accordingly, in the event of emergency door unlocking, such a device will be easily noticeable, enabling a prompt evacuation of people in the event of emergencies. Such devices are typically connected in the power line break to a free relay controller. In case there are no free ones available, an external relay can be used, which is usually connected to the outputs of an open collector type controller. To build the logic for managing such devices, it is necessary to uncheck the Display Only Basic Settings option in the Access Point settings on the Equipment tab, and set the Use terminal in the Unlocking Factor Indication line parameter. In this case, to perform such tasks, either a separate visual and audible notifier or built-in reader indication can be used. Sigur controllers have outputs for controlling the indication of readers, as well as general-purpose outputs that, after certain settings, can control similar devices. Finally, let's consider the door from the perspective of collecting clear and timely analytics, both in terms of employee interaction with it and monitoring its condition in case of emergencies. In this section, we'll consider devices like a door opening sensor and a cold sensor. The read switch and the SCUD can not only record passages accurately, but also assist in conducting door status analytics. In particular, when the door remains open longer than the set time in the settings after passage, the controller will be aware of this and will record the corresponding event for the system operator. In order to activate this functionality, you will need to go to the Settings and Access Points section located in the Hardware tab, uncheck the box next to Display Only Basic Settings, and adjust the time parameter for the time until door hold signal. Additionally, a door retainer is necessary when working with an electromechanical lock to maintain the door in an unlocked state, for instance, in the event of a fire alarm. This lock, which can be opened by a single voltage pulse, automatically locks itself when the door is closed. In order to maintain the constant unlocking of the door, the controller must be aware of when the door has closed, so that it can send a brief impulse to the lock once more. Another less frequently encountered yet significant component of a door-type access point is the hall sensor. This is a built-in sensor specific to electromagnetic locks that allows to determine the actual locking of the lock. The sensor triggers if the lock coil is powered and its plate is tightly magnetized to the core. The hollow sensor helps detect a malfunction in the lock control circuit, that is, when a lock controlled by the controller stayed locked instead of unlocked or vice versa, and evidence of tampering if the door was forced open with the engaged lock. The hollow sensor is connected to the discrete inputs of the controller, and in the access point settings on the Hardware tab, you must make sure to uncheck Display Only Basic Settings and specify the required terminal in the hollow sensor parameter field in order to properly configure it. So with you, we've discussed all important nuances related to door equipment in system. To conclude, I want to mention that an access point has drawbacks, like not separating people flow through an open door. However, that's a different story. And with that, I'm done until we meet again.